Buenos días. Muchas gracias por todo, por la invitación a Colombia, Bogotá, por mí. Mucho gusto. Desafortunadamente, that is the end of my Spanish. So from this point on, we're going to switch over to English. It is such an honor for me to be able to come and join you for this innovation conference today. You know, I had a really interesting chance to be introduced to Innovación in Colombia yesterday. Unexpectedly, I had an opportunity to talk to Manuel Jose Carvajal, who is just retired as VP of Innovation at Grupo Carvajal S.A. And we were talking on the phone, and this was just kind of a spontaneous conversation. But Manuel Jose, he gave me the perfect opening line for what I want to share with you today. Because as I was talking to him, he said the following. He said, Daniel, you have to understand that here in Colombia, we have lots of innovation tools that are now available to us. But what we are missing is the ability to see the big picture. I realized there could be no better introduction for what I would like to share with you, because what I believe that if we're going to look at the big picture, we're going to look at it with a picture. It's not words, it's a picture. And this is a process, this idea of visual thinking, that I have been blessed to have the opportunity to share with organizations around the world over these last 10 years. And what I really wanted to share with you is a story. I thought the best way to begin would be to tell a story about pictures. So, about 5 years ago now, I was invited by the Boeing Aircraft Company, which is located up in Seattle, in the northern part of the United States. I was invited to come up and do a workshop very similar to this for a half day with the project managers that are overseeing the development of the new 787 Dreamliner. This is the brand new airliner. It's all composite construction, fabulous. Probably the most complex machine that has ever been mass produced. So when I'm there at Boeing, it's already looks to me to be crazy what they're doing. They explained to me it's even more complicated than I had thought, because it turns out that the 787 is built in 17 different countries by people speaking 12 different languages at the same time. So for example, if we look at this picture, anything that we see here in light blue is built in the United States. Anything that we see in green is built in Italy. Anything that's in yellow is built in China. Anything in red is built in Japan. The cargo doors are built in Sweden, the wingtips are built in South Korea, etc. So I have a question for them at Boeing. I'm saying, wait a minute. How is this even possible when you have all of these people that are speaking literally different languages that are each manufacturing one component that's going to be sent back to Seattle, and they're going to fit together within tolerances of millions of a centimeter? How is that possible when none of these people speak the same language? And the Boeing people said to me, oh, that's easy. It's because every aspect of the design and the construction and the maintenance and the building and the mechanics of this machine is communicated through pictures. What Boeing had actually done is developed an entire global communication structure and the tools and software to support it. So no matter what language I speak, whether it's Chinese or Korean or English or Italian, when I have a problem, when I want to represent my idea to one of my colleagues around the world, I formulate my question in pictures on this network, and then my colleague around the world is seeing exactly the same pictures as me. And there is no language gap anymore, because the language of pictures is absolutely universal. And the really amazing thing is that in the end, it actually works. The machine flies. It's incredible. So on a side note, I used to love telling this story because it is the best visual problem-solving story ever. However, for anybody who's interested in aviation or the business of aviation, which is a very, very big business, 2 years ago, as the first 787s were being deployed in Japan on their first operational flights, they didn't work. Fires were breaking out on board this brand new machine. 2 occasions, the airplanes have to make an emergency landing. This is a disaster. This is a really, really big problem. And I just want to give you a sense of how big is this problem. Let's put some numbers to this. You could go tomorrow and buy a new 787 Dreamliner, this airplane. You could buy one if you wanted. The price is $200 million. Okay? US dollars, $200 million. If you have $200 million in your pocket, you can go and drop it and buy one of these. Okay, now the reason the 787 has been so successful, most successful new aircraft launch in history, because 996 of them, so let's round it to 1,000, 1,000 of these aircraft were sold before it had ever flown. Now we begin to see how big is this problem. If this machine is catching on fire and cannot fly, this is a really big problem. This is now, let's add the zeros up here, this is a $200 billion problem. This is the kind of problem that brings global economies to a stop. Boeing has to fix this problem. I mean, does Boeing just say, oh, too bad, we'll go back and we'll build another one? No, they say we have to fix it. So what Boeing started to do is release information online about what they were doing to solve this problem. And along with that information, they released many photographs. And I love this. I want to share some of them with you. These are some of the photos from Boeing. So this is what was happening. The reason why the planes were catching on fire is the batteries. There are two of these batteries. They look just like this that are on the plane, and the batteries were catching on fire. Now, this is what the battery is supposed to look like, but on two occasions, this is what it looked like. Do we see the problem? We do. Okay, but we're not going to let this problem, we have to fix it. So then Boeing put out some more photographs, and I really love this one. This is what Boeing called the Tiger Team. These were the gentlemen who were given the job of fixing this problem now. Fix it. And what I find really amazing about this photograph is, what do I see on the whiteboard behind them? Do you see what I'm looking at here? When it comes time to really solving the problem, do I see really big stacks of PowerPoint lying on the table? Do I see enormous piles of documentation? I do not. I see them drawing pictures on a whiteboard. Boeing put out another photograph. This is the same team. This, and you know this, I know that you know what I'm talking about. When we really need, right now, stop what we're doing. We have to fix this thing. What do? We go back and we start to draw things out. What is the essential idea that I'm trying to convey? What picture would I draw to show it to you? And let's look at some of the pictures that these engineers at Boeing were drawing. So here we have the aircraft. The batteries that we're talking about are located in two places, one under the cockpit and one at the root of the wings. Now, the battery itself, we showed you that blue box a minute ago. For any of you who have an iPhone or an Android or a Windows mobile phone, the batteries that were catching on fire are exactly the same as the battery you have in your iPhone. Lithium oxide battery. It's exactly the same technology. In that big blue box that we saw, it's as if they just packed many, many, many of our iPhones next to each other. Picture number one. This picture the engineers are drawing. If this cell overheats, catches fire, what's going to happen? Well, it's clear. Every other cell is going to catch fire as well because they're packed so tightly together. So the engineers say, visual solution number one, let's make the box bigger and put more space between each of the individual cells. Then, if one of them overheats, it will not cause the others to overheat. Fairly simple. Solution number two is to simply make it a stronger box. So if one of these overheats, it's not going to leak out into the rest of the atmosphere of the airplane. These were the two solutions that they came up with. These were the two drawings that they drew, and everybody agreed, the regulators agreed. They say, okay, if you can make that work, we will allow you to fly the planes again. The engineers went out and they retrofitted each one of the aircraft, changing the batteries exactly as the picture here shows. Success. And now, the good news, of course, is the airplane is flying again. And the $200 billion problem has been avoided. Because they drew. Pictures. We've seen it today already from Claudia and Diego. Pictures. They don't only help us communicate, but they help us think. And as innovators, what we need to be doing all the time, as the people who've already spoken, we need to be thinking. And I'm going to help guide you in very specific ways that we can think in new ways by using pictures. Now, let's talk for a moment about PowerPoint. I know that there is nobody in this room who has ever created a PowerPoint that looks like this, right? Of course not. Of course we do. We live in this world of PowerPoint. And you know what? When we're putting it together, we love it. We absolutely love it because we know that we've got every detail and every idea and every fact and every piece of data. They're in there and we love it. And we know we've come up with the solution. But then we show it to someone else and they say, what? I don't even want to look at that thing. So, for the rest of the time that I have with you, I would like to propose a different approach. We do our PowerPoint. We do our thinking. We collect our data. We do our analysis. We do our interviews, yes, of course. But when it comes time for us to think about what is really important about what I have discovered, what do I really need to share with you, I'm going to draw it. I'm going to say, you know, this is where we are and this is where we want to be, and I'm going to move us along this way, and how are we going to do it? We're going to do it by doing something a little bit differently than we have. We're going to be thinking differently. Show me what you mean. Show your own mind what you mean. And amazing ideas are going to start to flow. I call this visual thinking. This is the term that, yes, I helped to invent this term, I suppose, or coin this term 6-7 years ago now with my first book. And it has now become something that many people use. When I say visual thinking, I mean something really, really specific. I don't mean some sort of, oh, crazy, let's all be cool. No. I mean, let's learn to intentionally take advantage of our visual system that every one of us was born with, our eyes and our mind's eye. Let's learn to use that amazing system to help us discover ideas and develop those ideas and share those ideas in a way that words can never do. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about. The pictures that complement the words, that do the job that words can never do, for reasons that we will talk about. And as we become better at visual thinking, which all of us are already very good, we're very, very good at it. We're just going to improve a little bit. We're going to find that at a minimum, there are probably 4 ways that this visual thinking is going to help us. Way number 1 is to help us clarify. Let's face it, any problem we look at is complicated because the world is complicated. Life is complicated. Imagine if I told you that there was a simple way to look at that complex problem and understand what it's really about by breaking it down into a series of very simple, underlying visual elements. We would be able to clarify the problem. What is it that we're really trying to fix? And then we would be able to create something new. Why? Because now we can literally see what are the underlying pieces of my idea. And I can take and I can move them. And I can rearrange them. And I can create something new that wasn't there before because now I can see it. And now that I've created a picture, I can convince other people of the power of my idea for the simple reason that they can see it. And then, because I can convince them, I can compel people to take action for the simple reason that they now see, literally see, what I've been asking them to do. It's amazing what we can do. And we're going to be able to do all of that not by drawing hundreds of pictures or by becoming really talented artists. Forget all that. What I'm going to share with you for the rest of the time that I have is we can explain to ourselves and to anybody else any idea that we've ever had in the world with just 6 pictures. I will prove to you why this is so. We will explore a little bit of the neurobiology of how does this miracle of vision actually work. And by understanding that, we will be able to take advantage of that system and use it in an incredible way by just drawing 6 simple pictures. So look, here is the summary. Everything that I'm going to share with you for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to summarize it right now. Look, we can solve our problems with pictures. We can solve our problems with pictures. It doesn't matter what the problem is. The problem, it could be, yes, it could be an innovation problem. But to be right up honest with you, it could be a mechanical problem. It could be a financial problem. It could be a human resources problem. It could be a leadership problem. It could be a personal problem. Any problem that we have the ability to articulate with words, I know that we have the ability to articulate infinitely more clearly through the pictures. And the pictures are simple. If we can draw the most basic things, we will be able to draw a picture of any idea. What I'd like you all to do now, I think most of you have a little notebook in front of you. Everybody should have a notebook in your bag. I would like you to pull out this notebook, and I'd like you to pull out some kind of a pen, because I'm going to ask you to draw along with me for the rest of the time that we have, just a little bit. And there will be no exceptions. I will be watching. I want everybody to have their book and to open that book to a blank page, and we're going to draw. I want you to pick a page. I want you to take a page, and the drawing is going to be very simple. I want you to do this. I want you to take a blank page and just draw me a circle on it. Go ahead and make it a big one. And, I don't care if it's a beautiful circle or an ugly circle. I just want you to warm up a little bit and draw us a circle. Can everybody do that with me? Does anyone need any help? We can do that? Okay, I want to see some hands moving. I want to see us just drawing a big old circle on a piece of paper. That circle is our brain. That's our brain. Now, I want you to take that circle and I want you to cut it in half. From top to bottom, I want you to cut it in half. And fill in half that brain. We're filling that in because the half that we're filling in represents the total capacity we have in our brain for processing visual information. It is estimated that probably around 45%, just slightly less than 50%, of all of the capacity that we have in our brain, in one way or another, is dedicated to vision. More of our brain is dedicated to processing vision than any other thing that we do. Orders of magnitude more than to processing auditory and words and things like that. Incredible. That's what we're going to take advantage of. So when people say to me, Dan, this sounds good, but I'm not an artist, I can't draw. Yes, you can, and yes, you are. All of us have the ability to become incredible visual thinkers just by getting started, and that's what we're going to do for the rest of our time. And as we do this, as we draw, we're going to find that we are in really, really good company with some pretty amazing people. Leonardo da Vinci, in my mind, probably the smartest person that's ever lived. Think about what Leonardo could do. Leonardo could design and build a cannon. Leonardo could design a fortress. Leonardo could design the first helicopter. Leonardo designed the world's first parachute. And Leonardo could paint the Mona Lisa. Wow. How did Leonardo think? By drawing and writing. Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the gramophone, sound, as we begin to process it and understand how to communicate sound now. Coming up with an idea, you have to be able to draw out your idea. Words cannot describe it. Alberto Santos Dumont, I don't know how many of you know the name, gentleman from Brazil. First person to fly a motorized aircraft. Before the Wright brothers flew, Santos Dumont had left Brazil and had gone to Paris, and he had drawn his machine. If I'm going to try to create an idea, I have to be able to draw it out. It's not enough to be able to talk about it. Very, very successful. Thomas Edison. If I'm going to invent a light bulb, I have to be able to draw out my idea. Botero. If I am going to try to think through my idea, I have to be able to draw out my idea. Before the painting comes the drawing. What is the idea that I'm trying to get out of my head? I'm going to put it on a piece of paper. Words are great, pictures are better. Interesting woman, not known. She should be well known. Donella Meadows, an American woman in the 1970s, working at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She was the inventor of what we now call systems thinking. The idea that we could create computer systems that could model out very, very complex environments like global climate change, population growth. She invented these systems by drawing. And her drawings are very simple. In fact, she based the entire model of systems thinking on a very simple idea. She called it the bathtub model. The bathtub model, like where I take my bath. Because she said any system can be modeled out if we assume that at the middle of it there is a reservoir, a kind of a bathtub that contains some sort of resource. That could be water, that could be gasoline, that could be electrons, that could be energy, it could be ideas, it doesn't matter. And there's always a valve coming in, and then there's a valve going out. And there's a source of that material that I regulate through the valves coming in, And then there's a source that it's drifting off to as I'm regulating it going out. And if you just take those simple pieces and start to layer them, it's possible to come up with a model of any system whatsoever. And this guy, Gabo, I looked up a quote from him this morning. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, how did you learn to write? Look what he says, by drawing. By drawing cartoons. Before I could read or write, I used to draw comics at school and home. How do you learn to write? I draw. Well, why is it then in school that the moment we start to learn to read and write, they say stop drawing? I hate to say it, but that's the stupidest thing you could ever do. The moment that we learn to read and write, that is the moment when you say draw more. Because that's when the two start to complement each other. Guillermo del Toro, same idea. I don't know how many of you have seen any of his movies. Pacific Rim is one of my favorites. The same idea. I cannot communicate unless I'm able to draw out my idea and write about it. And a guy who's been mentioned several times already, I didn't know this, Steve Jobs. You want to know what Steve Jobs' real secret was? He had many. He understood that when he wanted to run a meeting, the picture was going to be the critical piece of the meeting. What Steve Jobs would do, he would think through, okay, I'm about to have a meeting. I want my team to do something new, launch a new product, launch a new service, whatever it is that we're going to do. And he would say, what is the one simple drawing that I will make on the whiteboard that will communicate the essence of my idea? And he would practice it, and then he would go in there, and maybe it was a timeline, or maybe it was a very simple sort of target drawing. That would become the way that you lead the meeting. Give our audience the drawing that explains exactly what I want to talk about in a way that they can see. And that's what we do. Look, there is a kind of an unwritten rule about why does visual problem solving really work. And it goes something like this. I think of it like this. Whoever best describes the problem, this person or this person, whoever best describes the problem is the person who will solve the problem. The example I like to give is this. Imagine if someone came running into your room and said, you know, oh my gosh, it's a catastrophe, the world is falling apart, it's terrible, give me money to fix it. I'm hoping that you would say no. But imagine this, if the same person came into your room and they said, look, we know there is a problem, and I have started to use my pictures to understand what are the pieces of that problem. And it turns out, as we know, that we have these particular customers or constituents or people that are working. And as we know, they're all working through this particular mechanism or process or interface or system or whatever it is. And the outcome is always this, which is not what we want. Would you help me? Would you support me if I was to go in and try to study a little bit more about these people and try to figure out what is happening in this process? Is there a different type of process or interface or mechanism we should use that will give us the result that we want? The point I'd like to make, there's another way to put this. It's a very simple little idea. Whoever draws the best picture gets the money. Whoever draws the best picture gets the money. It's not something that we see very often, but that's only because we don't draw very often. But when we do, we win. And I don't mean to be blunt about it, but let's make no mistake. If we are trying to convince someone of our idea, if we're trying to convince someone to take action, if we're trying to convince someone to give us money in order to continue our project, the person who draws the best picture is the person who's going to win. There are lots and lots of examples. I'm going to show you some more. But why is this so? Why is it that we're so good with pictures, but we tend not to think about it? Well, let's go ahead and look a little bit at the human brain. In reality, we are of two minds. I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with this idea of right brain and left brain thinking. Is everybody familiar with this idea, right brain, left brain thinking? So it turns out that there is some scientific basis behind a lot of the theories, but there's also a lot of sort of popular psychology stuff over the last 15, 20 years that has emerged, which is not very real. So let's look at some of the facts for a moment. Every mammal, including humans, has basically the same sort of brain architecture. And if we were to just look at a human and we were to say, this is our spinal cord, this is our backbone, our spinal cord, at the top of that, we have something called the brain stem, otherwise known as the reptilian brain, the most ancient part of our thinking system. And this is true of all mammals. And then around that, we have something called the limbic brain, which appears to be where we have most of our sort of emotional processing. Here we have very, very rapid reactions: fight or flight, run, engage. And then around that, we have, well, what do I feel about it? Do I love it? Do I hate it? Does it scare me? Does it attract me? And then all mammals have around that the big part of the brain, which is called the neocortex. And when we think about the human brain and we're thinking about the gray part with all the folds on it, what we're actually thinking about is the neocortex. All mammals have that, but in humans, it's massively enlarged compared to any other mammal. Those are all facts. Let's look at some more. If we were to look at this and sort of rotate it and now look at the brain from the top down, we would see that the neocortex is broken into two pieces. And they are completely separate. They operate completely on their own, the right side and the left side. Now, it is true that they're connected at the back by a massive bundle of nerves. This is called the corpus callosum. This is the part that connects them. But what, in fact, we have in our head, it is as if we have two engines running all the time. We don't have one, we have two. Now, why might this be? There's no reason for it. Why wouldn't one engine be more efficient? Why would we need two? So the latest sort of bioevolutionary theory goes something like this. Imagine our most ancient ancestors, millions of years ago, out there on the African steppe, on the African savanna. And let's draw the horizon out here. So this is the horizon, far out there on the edge. And way out on the horizon, I'm going to draw a little gazelle. Okay, a little gazelle, you know, the bouncing deer. So there we have the world's ugliest gazelle right there. But I don't want you to get too attached to that gazelle because we're going to eat it. Because that little gazelle is lunch. If our tribe is going to survive, we need to catch that because we need to eat it. So that gazelle is very fast. So clearly, it would be beneficial to us if we're going to catch it, which we can do. But if we can keep 100% of our attention on that one distant point on the horizon, as long as it takes us to run it down. Because the moment we look away, we're going to lose it. So we need to keep 100% attention focused on that tiny little point on the horizon. But if all of our attention is focused out there, we're going to totally miss the lion, this ugly lion that's behind us, that's going to eat us. So now all of a sudden, we've got two tasks that we need to do at the same time. We need to keep 100% focus on that one little point, and we need to keep 100% focus making sure that we're checking out the periphery and what's behind us too. Two different jobs, two different engines. Each engine is optimized for that particular task. So, if this is true, and it sounds like it makes a lot of sense to me, what it tells us is it appears that half of our brain has developed to be really good at looking at the world in terms of little tiny bits and being able to focus on one of those bits for a very long period of time with no distraction and really look at that thing and really see it in detail. The other half of our brain appears to have developed to be the glue that pulls all those little bits together. The world doesn't make sense if it's just a bunch of individual pixels. Something needs to pull all of them together and see the bigger picture. So if we were to jump forward to today, where we are, modern humans, so incredibly verbally able, with all our tools and our language and our grammar, I think it looks something like this. When we look out at the world, and look, I speak English, so the word I'm going to choose is that one. I see a rabbit. I don't even know. What is the Spanish word for rabbit? I don't know. Help me spell it out. See, N, E. And is this Enye? No, it's good? Okay. So, I have no idea what that is. I see this thing and I know exactly what it is. It's that. It's not a rabbit. It's that. Rabbit just happens to be the term that someone came up for it in my language family a long time ago. My brain thinks it's that. So here's the interesting thing. When I look at this thing, I have two different responses. Most of you probably think that and think that. But let's look at them for a moment. They don't look anything alike. So, okay, tell me, which one is correct? Well, it's a silly question. They're both correct. This is exactly where we are now. Here's the problem. Here is the problem. Over our history, but in particular for the last probably 400 years, and sadly accelerating over the last 100 years, we have come to believe that this is the part of our brain that equals intelligence. Intelligence is, so we say, the ability to string together a linear series of sounds and ideas to create a linear verbal description of an idea. That's what it means to be intelligent. And that's what we teach in school, and that's what we test for, and that's what we train for, and we are crazy. Because this side, by the way, is bigger, is faster, and knows much, much more about what's going on than this part is ever going to. The only limitation is this side does not have words. But this side has so much more. How much more does this side have? Let's take a look. We're going to do a little test now. Simple little test. I don't want anyone to panic. You're not going to have to write anything down. All that's going to happen is I'm going to show you a series of 30 pictures. And they are random. And I promise you they are random pictures because I simply went on Google Images, and I downloaded the first 30 pictures that showed up. So I'm going to show you a series of 30 pictures. They're just random. They're in no particular order. I don't want you to try to memorize them. You won't have time because we're only going to look at each picture for about a quarter of a second, really, really fast. So I don't want you to write anything down, no memorization. I want you to just look at the screen, and here we go. Okay, that's all 30. Can anybody tell us all 30 in order, please? Anybody? Of course not. It's a silly question. So I want us to forget that for a moment. And what I want to spend some time on now is talking about the power of vision. What do we actually mean when we talk about visual thinking? And here's the quote. I give this to you. This is the quotation. If any of you ever want to go back to a client or back to your school or back to your business and say, I want to give you the numbers, here they are. Dr. Leo Chalupa is a gentleman, he used to be the director of neurobiology at University of California at Davis. He's now moved to George Mason University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Chalupa and his team, they literally are the people who wrote the book. They were the ones who wrote the textbooks on the vision neurosciences. So for anybody who decides to go to school and try to learn neurobiologically how does vision work, you will be reading Dr. Chalupa's book. I asked Dr. Chalupa to review my own work, and he said, yes, this is really intriguing. There's a lot of validity here. And I said, can you tell me, just give me a quote, how powerful is vision? And this is what Dr. Chalupa said. More of the brain is devoted to vision and visual processing than any other known function, including language. More neurons in the human brain are involved in vision than is the case of all other sensory modalities combined. More of our brain is dedicated to vision and processing vision than all of our other senses combined. So if we think about what the brain does, we're looking and we're seeing, and we're looking and we're seeing. Yes, we're doing a lot of other things too. We're loving, or we're swooning, or we're hating, or we're doing, or we're talking, or we're eating, we're breathing. But more than anything else, what we are really doing is we are looking and we are seeing, and we are making sense out of what we are seeing. So we could make the argument, and we would be right, that basically, by virtue of being human, we are essentially walking, talking, visual processing machines. Think about it like this. The organ in our body that consumes the greatest amount of energy is our brain. More of the calories that we eat are going to support our brain than to any other thing that we do. More of our brain is dedicated to vision than any other thing that we do. You see where I'm going with this? The fact is, we wake up in the morning and we open our eyes. And we begin to see the information around us. We tend not to think about it. It's very unconscious for most of us. But yes, the sun did come up, or there's clouds outside. And then we start to move through our day, and we are constantly distracted by the things that we see. They're trying to get in and make sense. And sometimes we see something, a shape or a color, which is so magnetic to us, it completely captivates our attention, and we'll fall in a hole or something. That is what the power of what this visual machine is doing. What's really interesting is that the visual mind never sleeps. All of this capacity we have for processing vision is working all the time. Has anybody ever had a dream? Anybody in here ever had a dream? Of course we dream in color. The same visual system that is at work right now as you're looking at me and looking at the screen is the same system that's working when you're asleep. Instead of generating thoughts from information coming in, it's generating the thoughts from information that you've already stored. But you're seeing it. Didn't that dream seem real at the time you were having it? The same visual system. So here's kind of a little trick for those of you that ever find yourself in a position where you're giving a presentation, or you're training someone, or you're trying to present something to a client. The real reason that PowerPoint fails when we have a long list of words, the reason that it fails is because there's really nothing interesting for our visual mind to look at. If you're giving a presentation and you have a whole bunch of lists of words on the slide, it is not your audience's fault that after about 6 minutes, they're going to fall asleep. It's because of the way the brain works. If there's nothing interesting for the visual mind to do, it's going to leave. The visual mind is going to start making stuff up. So, what we want to do is take advantage of this and recognize that what I'm doing with you now, it's something I call lead with the eye and the mind will follow. If we lead with the eye, the mind will follow. If I keep telling you what to look at, I want you to look at this, I want you to think about this, I want you to look at this. If I am guiding your eye, as long as I keep doing that, it's as if I have a hook in your nose and I am pulling your brain along. You will never be able to look away. And the moment that I just start talking for too long, the brain's going to start to check out. So then what I do is I say, look at me over here. Come back to this part. How do we? Who is this dog? Let's take a look for a moment at how vision works. This is really, really cool. The way we're going to do this is by looking at some more pictures. So I'm going to show you now a series of 4 very simple little drawings, just like this. We're not going to talk about them. I just basically want you to look at them for a moment. And do we all see that there are some things in this picture? There are some things in this picture, yes? Okay. This is picture A. Now I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to go to picture B. This is picture B. I'm going to go back and forth many times because I want us to see the difference between, back to picture A now. This is A, and this is B. Do we all see that some things are changing? From A to B, some things have moved, right? So this time, I want us to go back one more time. I'd like you to ask yourself one question. How much time do you think is passing between this picture A and this picture B? How much time between this picture and this picture, more or less? Anyone? How much time? Second, 6 seconds, some number of seconds, okay? So let's go on to the next picture now. C. I can hear, yeah, something else has happened. We see that. And now let's go on to the last picture, D. Something else has happened. So let's ask ourselves the same question. Let's go back for a moment. Same question. Between this picture and this picture, how much time do we think has passed? Hours, exactly. Now, how do we know that? Because we said all of that. We didn't say a word about what was going on in those pictures. This is how vision works. What we just looked at. Let's go back and look at those 4 simple pictures for a moment. And let's look what's not in them. There is no color. There is no shadows. There are no fancy three-dimensional effects. Anybody ever worked in PowerPoint and in some sort of desperate hope that you'll get someone to look at your slide, you put all kinds of eye candy in it and make it bright colors and rainbows and shadows? That's desperate. We don't need it. What the visual mind is looking for is it's trying to make sense. It's trying to get meaning out of what it is seeing. That could be bright and colorful, or it could be as simple as this. What the visual mind is optimized to do is draw meaning out of images. And we do that in a very specific way. So when we are looking at those four pictures, A, B, C, D, it's actually like we're looking at a little sort of a scale model of how vision works. What we're simply doing here is mimicking what our visual mind does thousands of times a second. And we just slowed it way down. Because what's happening is we're looking at this, and immediately our visual system goes to work. And it starts to pull that picture apart in very specific ways. And it says, oh, look, there's a little girl, and she had a dog, and there are some birds, and there's a sun, and there's a boat, and there's a bridge. It's identifying those things. And then what it's doing is it's saying, oh, look, they're moving. The dog is moving over there. Well, why is the dog moving over there? Well, because it saw those birds over there. What are those birds doing over there? Thousands of times a second we're doing this. These little stories are emerging. And then what we do, very often, although not all the time, is we then create a verbal narrative to explain what we think we just saw. But I want us to understand that the verbal narrative that we apply to the pictures comes after the fact. We are actually drawing the meaning out before we start to put the words into place. So, what this tells us, a lot of time, money, and energy has been spent in the last several decades on trying to understand this miracle of vision. How does it work? Because it is fabulous. Turns out, vision, what is it? Simple thing. There is light out there. It's electrical energy in the form of photons. That's light. Those little photons come in through my eye, and they get some rapid fire processing done right on the retina, on the back of my eye, and then those electrical signals are sent into my brain. And out of that, I make meaning. I know where I am, I know how I'm moving, I know where you are, I know what I'm drawing, etc., all the time. Here's an interesting side note. It takes about 1/10 of a second, 1/10 of a second, in order for the signal to come in for our eyes and for us to process it. So just something that's interesting to think about. All of us are living our lives 1/10 of a second behind truth. Now, our visual system has adapted to try to make that not kill us. And that's why we have reflexes and reactions. And that's why often if we see sort of optical illusions where it looks like things are moving that they're not, that's not a bad thing. That's actually, we're seeing evidence of our brain that has developed to try to anticipate 1/10 of a second ahead all the time. So, we've got a lot of data out here. There's a lot of light. There's too much electrical signal for our brain to process it all the time. As amazing and big as our visual mind is, it's not enough. It can't do it. There's too much out there. So what our brain has done is it has developed to be really good at doing the best job it can in making sense out of information overload. There is too much signal, so here's what happens. Our visual system breaks the light down into 6 different work streams. For those of you with an engineering or technical background, 3 of those work streams happen in parallel. They're happening at the same time in different parts of the brain, followed by 3 more advanced steps that happen in sequence after. So you can break the entire visual magic down into these 6 things. We will go through each one of them, so you don't need to write any of this down because you'll draw a picture of this. But each one of those 6 is called a visual pathway. And we have been able to describe the distinctions between each of those visual pathways and know what they are looking for. Each visual pathway has one task. The signal comes in, go do this. And one of them is actually called the what pathway. Goes like this. Another one is called the where pathway. Goes like that. You combine those 2, you get something which is called the how pathway. And these are really the names. I mean, God bless the scientists, in this case, for calling things what they are. So we're going to actually look at these. The reason why I'm going to spend the rest of our time on this is because this is something that was the big breakthrough for me in my work, is something I call the 6 by 6 rule. And it simply says this: if it is true that we make sense of the world by breaking it down into 6 different types of visual information, it seems to me to be true that we don't need to know how to draw hundreds of pictures to draw anything. We just need to know how to draw 6. We draw the picture that is feeding each pathway exactly the information that it's looking for, and then we let our audience's mind stitch them together. 6 by 6. 6 ways in, 6 ways out. 6 types of visual information come in, 6 pictures we draw to reflect it. All we are doing is we're just passing them through. That tells us that we can't explain anything by drawing 6 pictures. And this is where we're going to spend the rest of our time now. So I'd like again to pull out your notebook and find a blank sheet. Don't write this part down. We're going to draw together in a moment, but I just want to give you a preview of where we're going to go. I'm going to share with you that it is possible to explain any idea you have ever had and clarify that idea for yourself or for someone else by drawing a portrait, a simple little set of stick figures, a chart, a map, a timeline, a flow chart, and an equation in sequence. If we can draw those simple 6 pictures of our idea, that idea will become clear to us and clear to anyone else that we show it to. Let's go ahead and draw. Enough of this theory. Find a blank sheet in your notebook. Draw me a picture of your idea. Right now, go. Impossible, don't. Here's what's happened. This is where we panic. We say, oh, I'm not an artist. I wouldn't know how to draw it. You can, and I'm going to show you how to do it. The first thing we need to do when someone says, can you draw a picture of our idea? The first thing we need to do is not panic. Here's what we do instead, and I want you to do it along with me. In the upper left-hand corner of your piece of paper, I want you to draw a little circle, about so big. This is the way we start every problem-solving picture. We just draw a little circle, and then we give it a name. And in this case, I would like you to call it me. That's me. Now, what's happening is that when we start to think through an idea, we've been trained to overthink things. Overthinking is good later, not at the beginning. Because if we overthink at the beginning, we never get started. So all we need to do, think about your idea, your problem. What is it you want to communicate? Draw a circle and name it the first thing that comes to mind. It could be, thank you. It could be me, or it could be my company, or it could be innovation, or it could be today, it could be Colombia, it doesn't matter. Whatever's the first thing that comes to mind, label that. And then, that works so well, let's take a moment and make it look a little bit like you. The picture has started, and that was not hard. So let's do it again. Let's draw another circle, and I'd like you to make this a bigger one, and take up a lot of your piece of paper. And we're going to give this circle a name as well. And I would like to call this one my problem. Now, a really amazing thing has happened. All we've done is draw 2 circles and give them 2 names. And yet, our visual mind is already jumping, saying, wait, one of them's bigger than the other one, and what's with the position between them? The real problem with verbal communication, language, is that by definition it is linear. That is to say, if I'm going to explain something to you using words, I have to start here, and then I talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and I get you here, and then I talk and talk and talk, and we get here, and then finally we get to the end. The problem there, that's beautiful, but the problem is, think about the amount of cycles of mental activity you're going through just to remember what I said earlier. The amount of mental capacity that's occupied just with remembering where did we start, what did we say in the middle, and where at the end. The beauty of the picture is I don't have to remember anything. It's all right there in front of me. I can then free up all of that mental energy to focus on the real problem rather than on trying to remember where did we start this story. So with just these 2 circles and 2 names, we already start to see something. And one of the things that we notice, we can't help it, is we see that the problem is bigger than us. That problem circle is bigger than the me circle. There is no way I can solve that problem. Aha, I can. Just as we did before, you're already good at this because we practiced. I want you to take that circle and cut it in half from top to bottom. And now I want you to imagine that that circle is a pizza. And I want you to cut it up into 6 slices as best as you can. Now what do we see? We see that each slice is about the same size as us. We can solve that problem if we take it slice by slice. So what we're going to do for the rest of the time that we have together, another 6 or 7 minutes or so, is we're going to walk around this slice one by one. I'm going to give you the scientific name of the visual pathway, and then I'm going to show you the picture that you would draw to explain it. So let's start. In the first, I'd like you to write who and what. Or, of course, whatever the equivalent word would be in Spanish. Who and what. This is actually called the what pathway. The job of the what pathway is to simply look at the world and identify the objects that are in the world. So, when I was looking at this picture, a part of my mind was saying, there's a thing, oh, that's a girl. There's a dog, there's a boat, there's a plane. The job of the what pathway is simply to identify the things that are in front of us. So if I'm to hold this up in front of you, what is this? Okay, it's a bottle of water in English. In Spanish, what do we call this? It's different. It's funny. English isn't the same thing as Spanish, and yet the thing is the same thing. This is not a bottle of water. This is a that. It's this. I happen to call it a bottle of water. My what pathway looks at this object. It recognizes the shape, the color, the way that it reflects light, many, many different things, and it says, I know what it is, it's that. And I have seen that before, great, move on. When I want to explain to someone, so we've got here in our slice, who and what. When I want to explain to someone the objects, the people, the things that are in my idea, the what pathway, I draw what I call a simple little portrait. That is a little icon to say, in my idea, there is a man. So I draw a little icon of a man, a little portrait. Maybe there's a woman. There's a car. I don't know what this problem is, but it's going to be a bad one. There's a tree. There's a fish. I don't know. The point is, I'm trying to say, in the problem that I'm going to identify, there are these different things, and I draw a little portrait of them to give my visual mind access into what are those pieces so that I will remember them. Here's one of my favorite portraits to show you the power of a simple portrait. This is something called the Wong-Baker Faces Pain Rating Scale. Forget the name. Forget the words. It's brilliant. This was invented by 2 nurses, Nurse Wong and Nurse Baker, originally for use in the burn wards in children's hospitals, where children are coming in who are burned. And the nurses said it's very difficult for the children to describe what hurts because they don't have the verbal ability yet. So children are really good with pictures. Why don't we create this very simple little spectrum? And what will happen is the doctor will show it to the child and say, I'm going to point to different parts of your body, and you point to the picture that tells me how bad does that part hurt. And here's the beauty of these little portraits. They're so simple, these 6 little drawings. The scale was so effective that it's now been used around the world in emergency care facilities where there's a language gap between the providers and between the patients, between the doctors and the patients. This little chart has been used in over 100 countries around the world. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter what culture, what language, what geography. To be human, every human looks at this and knows exactly what they mean. That is the power of a simple portrait. That's what we mean. Draw the simplest picture you can to allow the visual mind to associate to that object. Slice number 2 now. I want you to write in here, how much. This is the part of our visual mind that likes to count. It's a very different part than what's going before. So when we were looking at this drawing, what it does is it tends to clump things and then to try to make a very rapid-fire guess at how many of them are there, whether it's 2 or 3 or 5 or a lot. So for example, if I was to hold this up in front of you, we know what it is. Our what pathway says, oh, it's a bottle of water. But it also says, how many objects am I holding right now in this that you can see? How many objects? Okay, now how many objects am I holding? Okay, the fact that we can identify that is because we have this counting pathway. It likes to try to make an estimate of number. So what we want to do is when we want to explain to someone how much are we talking about in our idea. I already told you that there was a man and there was a woman and there was a car. But now I want to talk about how many are there. Are there 10? Are there 10 million? Are there more or are there less? Now I draw a chart. Anybody who's ever used Microsoft Excel, you know exactly what I mean, right? I want us to draw a little bar chart to remember. Now we draw a chart. What is a chart? A chart is a visual representation of number. That's all it is. Turn complex numbers into a picture that I can see. So here's a very simple chart. It shows the price of tea around the world. Can you look at this? Can anybody tell us where is tea the most expensive right now? In France, okay? And where is tea the least expensive right now? In China. How do we know that? Because there are no numbers over here. Because the human mind is exceptionally good, unbelievably good at recognizing the relative size of things. So when I'm creating a chart, all I'm doing is creating a visual representation of number. Most of us are not very good at numbers, but we are really good at looking at those numbers when they're represented pictorially. Slice number 3. I would like you to write in there, where. The where pathway. That's the name. The where pathway is actually the most ancient part of our visual system. This is the oldest part we have. We have this in common with crocodiles, reptiles. They have a where pathway. The job of the where pathway is to measure the distance between the things that I see and the distance between me and them. I do not know what those objects are. That was the job of the what pathway. All the where pathway does, it's very simple, is it's just saying how far apart are those things. That's all it does. So for example, we do our little drill one more time. If I hold this up in front of us, I say our what pathway says bottle of water, our counting pathway says 1, and our where pathway says 5 meters in front of me, 3 meters above me, and slightly to my left. When we want to explain to someone where are the pieces of my problem, we draw a familiar picture now. Now we get to draw a map. Here is my house. Here's the river. Here is the treasure, the buried treasure. Here's the secret path. I will tell you this, a map. This doesn't look like my house. My house doesn't look anything like that. And this does not look like buried treasure. The point of a map is not to show what something looks like, but to show where is it in relation to something else. A map could be a schematic diagram. A map is a useful picture to draw when I want to show where do the pieces of a machine or an object or a process fit together. Where? A map is also a great picture to draw when I want to show what are the relationships between pieces within an organization. I will tell you a funny story. I'm going to go over time by a couple of minutes, but it's worth it because this is a good story. So, Fernando, I'm sorry. Or Diego, I'm breaking it already, but we'll just take a minute. Some years ago, I live in San Francisco in California, which is right near Silicon Valley. So it's a real blessing for me because it gives me an opportunity to work with many technology companies. A few years ago, a company came to my consultancy and they said, we have a problem. It was a company that makes software, accounting software, so software for bookkeepers and for accountants. And the reason that the company was having a problem is because the salespeople were selling software that the company didn't actually make. Those crazy salespeople, they'll sell anything. The client says, does it do this? Sure. Does it do this? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Then they come back to the office and talk to the engineer. Does it do this? No. Can we make it do this? No. This is a bit of a problem. So what we did is we created a map of the organization to try to see if we couldn't figure out where is the problem. We're not going to blame, we're not going to point our finger and say, oh, salespeople, you're bad. Engineers, you're bad. No. Let's look at where they're located. We have the administration up here at the top, and they're kind of in their nice Capitol building. And then we have the salespeople over here, and they're in their shiny, brand new glass tower, lots of money. And then we have operations, which they told us is a total circus. So we drew it as a circus. And then we actually have the factory. This is where the software people are there building the software, the accountants and the engineers down here. And then we have technical support that are over here sort of in the jungle in their little huts with no electricity or running water, you know, sort of forgotten about. And we look at this map and we say, okay, what does this tell us? There are very good and effective lines of communication from administration to sales and from administration to operations. But look at this, there are no roads between sales and the actual software engineers. No wonder there's a problem, because there are no incentives or mechanisms in place to enable the salespeople to talk to the people that are actually making the product. Solution? Build some roads. Create incentive programs. Make people's income dependent on their ability to communicate with these people that in the past they've never had to. It works. The power of a map. So I'm sorry I broke a little bit of time, but I thought it was worth it. Now, what I'd like us to do is go on to slice number 4 now and write in here when. Earlier on, I told you that 3 of these pathways are taking place at the same time in different parts of the brain. The what pathway, the how much pathway, and the where pathway are all taking place completely independently. They have nothing to do with each other. The brain's divided up the task, and each part's doing its job. Now, when we move into the next pathway, something really interesting is going to shift. Let's do the drill one more time. My what pathway says bottle of water. My how much pathway says 1, and my where pathway says there. Now, I want you to watch this because something really crazy is going to happen. Uh-oh. Oh my goodness. Is this the same bottle of water as this one? It can't be. Because my mind looked and it told me a minute ago that there's only one and it's right there. So how can there be one bottle in 2 different places at the same time? Oh, time is passing. Look, there is no mystery what the 4th dimension is. The 4th dimension is time. And we see it every time we see something move. The only logical explanation our mind can make, one bottle in 2 different wheres, is there's a difference between them in time. At one time it's here, but the same bottle in another time is here. We know that time is passing because we have eyes. We know that time is passing. We know that when is changing because of what we see. So when we want to draw a picture that says, I've told you the players, I've given you the numbers, I've showed you their locations, but now I want to show you when do they interact? What is the sequence? Now I get to draw my timeline. Here is the sequence in which things happen. A, B, C. So just on a little historical note, I grew up obviously in the United States. I was born in the 1960s. My father was in the Air Force. And I remember as a kid that the greatest thing that we had ever done, America, the United States, was go to the moon. And we went to the moon because President Kennedy, back in 1961, gave the greatest presidential vision statement ever. He said, you know what? We're going there. That's where we're going. And what's incredible about it is everybody could go outside at night and look at it and say, there it is. And we're all in agreement. Isn't that incredible? I often think, what if we could do that around things like healthcare or social reform? That's where we're going. It looks like that. That would be incredible. Now, that is a good map. That's a where picture, but it has nothing to do with time. But when President Kennedy in 1961 gave his speech, he said, okay, United States of America, we're going to the moon. And we're going to get there by the end of the decade. We're going to get there by 1970. Kennedy said 2 things, where we're going and when are we going to get there. So if you were an engineer at NASA, yeah, you knew we were going to the moon. Of course, we're spending billions of dollars. Where else are we going to go? But what Kennedy said is, I'm giving you a deadline. The picture that I draw is not a map of the moon. I draw a map of the time. Here is today. Here are all the things that we need to do. We need to build rockets. We need to train astronauts. We need to develop new kinds of engines and fuel. There's a whole bunch of things we need to do. And here is when we need to have it done. The picture that we now draw is a timeline. It's a map of time. It's a map of sequence. We have 2 more to go. If we were to put all of these together, we now get to pathway number 5, which is called the how pathway. This is really the highest level order of visual processing that we do. What that means is this was simple, simple, simple. We combine them, we watch for shifts, and now what how is actually doing, this is where we start to build out meaning from what we've looked at. So if we went back to our little story of the girl and the birds and the dogs, what happened when we were looking at this is we first identified the objects, we identified their number, and we identified their position. And then we saw them start to move. And as they were moving, we started to tell ourselves a story. And we said, oh, look, there's a little girl and she's got a dog. And there are some birds. If the dog sees the birds, the dog is going to run towards those birds. And then the birds are going to fly away. And if the dog hits that baby stroller, those parents are going to panic and start to yell, which is exactly what happened when I showed you picture B to C. We call this the how pathway because what it's doing is it's making meaning, cause and effect out of everything that we've witnessed before. So when we want to draw the picture at the end of our presentation that says, so of everything I've told you, how does it actually work? What is the chain of cause and effect? What are we actually going to do to solve it? Now I draw a flow chart, meaning we're here. We're going to apply some kind of influence that's going to move us over here. If we do nothing, we might go back to our original state. But if we apply a different influence, perhaps we end up in a different place. The problem and why I'm emphasizing this is very often when we do, especially for people that are in project management or innovation, when we do draw a picture in our presentation that shows the entire process, and we show that picture right off the first thing, most people are not going to be able to understand it and will stop looking at it and say, you don't know what you're showing me. The reason is because we make a mistake by showing this picture first. What we need to do is start here. First, identify who are the players. How many of them do I have? Where are they located? What is the sequence in which they interact? And then I combine all of those to create the flow chart, and now we say, bingo, I get it. But if I show this picture first, everyone will run away. It's too complicated. So I leave it for the end. So here's a very quick little flow chart. How does the human brain work? Sensory information comes in through all of our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our fingers. It gets processed in our reptilian brain, and we take behavior. We humans are particularly blessed because we have this sophisticated neocortex that allows us to do very sophisticated processing of that sensory information and then take more sophisticated behaviors. Very, very simple little flow chart. And now we're going to end. We have one more slice left. I imagine that you can probably think about what this one's going to be called. We've already done, what would it be called? It's going to be called why. We have just spent 20 minutes here, but an enormous amount of our visual and our mental capacity on looking at these pictures and turning them into meaning. Why did we do that? Because what our brain is really trying to do is make sense of the world around us and come up with some rules that we can rely on. Why is the world the way it is? Why do things like this happen? The picture that we want to draw, when we want to summarize, I've taken you through who and what, I've taken you through how much, where, when, how, and now I just want to say, the thing I'd like you to remember is a very simple idea. Now we draw what I call a visual equation, something like this. A square plus a triangle gives me a circle. It's what I call a visual equation. And you might be looking at me and saying, well, Dan, that's cute, but that doesn't, so what? We're here to talk about innovation. But the thing that, not even in Colombia, in the United States, what rarely people talk about is why do we need to innovate? I mean, why not just keep doing the same thing? What's wrong with that? It's worked up till now. Here's why. Here's why we innovate. Because let's say this square represents our business and how we act today. And we are really, really good at it. And we have made sure that our square is perfectly square. And we have shaved it down so that every corner is just exactly right. We have optimized our business. It's just unbelievable. In a formula, when we see a triangle, what does it represent? What does delta represent when it appears in a formula? Change. It represents change. This is just to remind us that we live in a world which is constantly changing. And what this little formula tells us is if we want to acknowledge that fact, we cannot do what we do now and assume that the outcome is going to be the same if the world in which we're doing it is different. Because I'll tell you this, a square plus change does not equal the same square. It equals something else. It could be a circle. It could be something else. So why do we innovate? Because we have to remember that the world is changing. And there's a very little simple equation for any of you who have innovation consultancies. You can spend 3 hours with your client just working through all of the jobs you can get from this. Let's do an analysis of how optimized your business is. Let's do an analysis of all the types of change that are coming at you and how rapidly they're coming at you. And let's do an analysis of where your business would be after we thought about those things. So we're now going to end, and here's an example from that little story. The why, from looking at the girl and the dogs and all of that, is clearly, well, dogs love birds. But birds do not love dogs. And now I have a rule, based on what I have seen, that I will take with me for the rest of my life. And if I ever see a dog and a bird, I know exactly what's going to happen. I want you to keep this little drawing. Because the next time that you're struggling with an idea, you want to share something with your client or yourself, I would like you to think through, one by one. I'm going to start here. I'm going to draw each of these little pictures in sequence, and I promise you this, by the time you get here, your own clarity of your problem will be so remarkable, you will have new insights that you never expected. 40 minutes ago, I showed you 30 pictures. I'm going to show them to you again. I'm now going to show you 2 pictures. I want you to tell me, right or left, which is the picture we saw before? Which one did we see before? Which one did we see before? Which one did we see before? A 100%. Our memories are stored as pictures, and they embed themselves in our memory before we even have the time to know that we've remembered them. And that is why we use pictures. I really appreciate the time that you've given me. I went a little bit over. I apologize for that, but I thank you so much for letting me share with you a little bit of visual thinking. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Thank you.